all so much for being here. Thank you. It's the end of the day. Thank you for staying. What a nice treat to be among book people. We've got this panel today on literary fiction. This is Rachel Khong. She wrote the book Real Americans. Next to Rachel is Kaveh Akbar. His debut novel is called Martyr! Also, it was just longlisted for the National Book Award in fiction. I know that that's embarrassing for Kaveh, but I don't care. It's so amazing, so just suck it up and take it. And then next to Kaveh is Sheila Sundar, and she wrote the book Habitations. I assume that everyone here has not read every book, so we're going to talk kind of broadly about the books. I'm hoping to hype you guys up about them. I have read all three. You should read all three. DM me, we can talk about it. I'm very excited. You have a book club in me whenever you get there. But for people who don't know, we'll just go down the line. Will you just kind of tell everyone in 30 seconds or so about the book broadly? Elevator pitch. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, God. You know, my book came out at the end of April, and I'm still so terrible at the elevator pitch. It's actually why I wrote the book, is because there's too much that I wanted to say. And so it's really about 3 generations of a Chinese-American family, and it's a book that's about why we become who we become. And that's the very short elevator ride.
That's so good.
It's just 2 levels, because I'm going to get out and, like, panic by myself.
Yeah, it's also a book where, like, you read the first third of it and you're like, oh, okay, this is like, I get it, and I love these characters, and I'm in it, and like, fuck yeah, this rules. Like, I can't wait to see what's gonna happen with them. And then like, you get off on a floor and you're like, wait, is this the same building? You know what I mean? And then like the next 2 acts are like, you're just in this. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. Can you guys see that? Like I can't fake that.
My hype man. You got to talk about your book.
No, well, but it's like, I mean, so it's like it's a lot of different. Like, she's not kidding when she says it's a lot of different things, and it's like really good at each of those things. I remember the first time I was reading it, and that first, like, I got off at that first level, and I was like, wow. My book is called Martyr. It's about a young man who's recently orphaned, recently sober, thank you, not entirely attached to remaining alive in the world, but wants to die for something meaningful. He doesn't want to just give his death away. He wants to die for something meaningful, so he goes on a search for something worth dying for. And over the process of doing so, he meets this artist who is dying at the Brooklyn Museum as her final performance in an Abramovich-esque performance of her own dying. She has a terminal cancer. She's got a couple weeks left to live, and she's living out her final weeks there in the Brooklyn Museum. People can come and sit across from her and talk to her about dying, and so our protagonist goes to talk to her, and a lot of the action of the book is catalyzed by those conversations.
Hi. I realized I don't have a copy of my book, which shouldn't bother me, except I in the spirit of like, no, it shouldn't. But I just want to say, what I do have in my bag, however.
Ooh, what do you have in your bag?
Rachel's book.
Hey.
I feel like that embodies the festival, right? Like, this is it's so exciting to be on stage with these people, and Traci and you all, it's so good. My book, Habitations, is about a sociologist from India who is grieving the loss of her sister, and it's the loss but also her own desire for a life that she senses but can't quite envision, that kind of propels her immigration. So it's a process of her moving to the US for graduate study, finding, after a series of moves, a very meandering journey, finding out what home means for her.
Okay, you're queuing me up. We're going to start with home. This was supposed to be later, but you queued it up perfect. So, you know, as I prepare for these sorts of events, I read the books and I try to think, like, what can we bring together from these stories? And as I'm sure you can kind of already hear, these books are similar in some ways, but also extremely different. But one thing is that all of your books sort of travel between a lot of homes. The characters are moving a ton. I mean, your book is called Habitations, so it's a clue, habitats. But I'm wondering how you all were thinking about home and the movement of a person and like the building of a community, because all of you are deeply rooted in that and throughout your books. Anybody can go first. I won't call on you.
I'll start. I was born in Iran. My first language was Farsi, which is why I have such a thick accent. That's a funny joke. Sometimes people don't laugh because they're like, oh. And I get really self-conscious.
It's a funny joke. You have to say it's a funny joke. It's a really funny joke.
Yeah. You know it's funny because I'm telling you so. And growing up, we moved constantly. My dad, my real biographical dad, worked on duck farms, like just industrial corporate duck farms his whole life. In the book, the protagonist's dad works on corporate industrial chicken farms, which is how you know it's not autobiographical. But so we just moved constantly, and usually between, like, we spent a lot of time in Milwaukee, but besides that, it was a lot of just kind of like small, little Midwestern towns around, that could support sort of industrial farming where land was cheap and labor was cheap, et cetera, et cetera. And so, not to be like too precious or twee about it, but home as a concept never had much of a spatial correlative to me. Like, I was born in Iran, my brain was terraformed by a language that I no longer speak, so it'd be absurd to call that home. I'll never be able to go back to Iran in this lifetime. And so, I don't know, it would be wrong to call that home, but neither would it be accurate to call any of the procession. I guess the place that I lived longest was, I taught in West Lafayette for 5 years. That certainly wouldn't be what I thought of when I thought of home. So there's not much of a spatial correlative for the word home for me. And I think that my life, insofar as I can summon something like patriotism, it is for an America that is a discrete set of places where my beloveds live. You know what I mean? And so the idea of home has a human face for me. And it is, I don't know, I think the novel is probably invested in that conception of home more than anything else.
Yeah, I just finished reading Sheila's book this morning at a cafe. I told you some of this, but I finished the book and just sort of sighed. And something that Sheila does very beautifully is sort of write about place, but characters sort of within those places, and how we sort of bring ourselves to the places themselves, right? Like, home is not this inert thing, and places are not just places. It's who you are in them and who you are in those locations. And similar to Kaveh, I had a very itinerant childhood, moved every couple of years, didn't have, I'm so jealous of people who have groups of friends that they knew from whatever, middle school, elementary school. I just don't really have that. And I think that is really something that shaped, who I am as a writer, but also just why I write. I write in part because I'm sort of, I realized recently, like, it's the deepest conversation that I get to have, and the reason that I know that it's the deepest conversation I get to have is whenever I try to tell somebody how much their book meant to me, I can only sort of, like, sadly say, like, I loved it. And, like, it doesn't express, like, how much I really, really, really loved it. Like, the conversation is the conversation that you have when you are reading the book, right? And it's also a conversation that you have when you're writing a book. And the conversation is sort of out of sync, but it's also so incredible that we get to have it. And I think, I wrote the one book that I wrote, and I got to have this conversation over many years, but every reader who reads the book creates their own version of the book. They bring their own experiences to it, and they sort of create this world with me. And so I'm sort of getting away from home, but I feel like that to me is like a home-like feeling, that feeling that I find in books. Yeah.
I was talking to a writer last night who, is my audio, I never know how my audio is. Is it okay? I was talking to a writer last night who was describing how the attachment she has to the land in West Virginia where she grew up, and how she hasn't gone more than 18 months without going back there. And I understood that so deeply but it had nothing to do with my own experience. But I felt almost like a nostalgia for her home, and I think that's maybe part of why we write is you can actually imagine other people's deep connections to a place. But what I've always felt that if I had roots somewhere, I too would be somebody who would never be able to go more than 18 months without going back there. I didn't have that. I had my parents are immigrants, but I grew up in the house in New Jersey where my parents still live. So there's always a memory of movement, and my mother was somebody who moved somewhat reluctantly, and so she had a deep nostalgia. They also, in very 1970s South Asian style, immigrated with their friends. So they brought this party with them. And so I grew up around so many stories. And I felt always, like when somebody would ask me where I was from, it always felt sort of incomplete because I felt like I was from where they were from because I was listening to those stories. And I knew that I was technically from New Jersey, though my roots there I didn't feel grounded or rooted in that place. And also very much felt like I was from Prince Edward Island because I loved Anne of Green Gables, and it felt like that. I must have there must be some past life where that was true also. And I think what I found wonderful about writing Habitations is much of what I found beautiful about reading books where characters move through places, that you honor these connections that sometimes you move through a place that you think you're just gonna pass through for a little bit, but they really affect you. We think that you're not gonna be touched by a town or a city or a moment or a graduate program or a relationship, but they leave their mark. And I felt as I was, I felt so marked by these books that I read, and I felt in writing my novel, because my character is so peripatetic, that I got to honor the fact that these places leave their scars, and they leave their marks, and they leave their memories, and you take them with you. So.
I think the title, I forgot the title of our panel. I was doing other things, but I think the title of our panel is something about multi-generational stories. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is, you all sort of set your books in and around almost the exact same time. You all have a 9/11 moment in your book, which I thought was really interesting, especially because I was reading Rachel and Sheila's books in the last 2 weeks as we kind of cross this 9/11 threshold that is this yearly moment. But I guess I have a 9/11 question later, but we'll get there. But the question about the multi-generational thing is what do you think going back sort of into the recent past lets you do, or shows your reader or shows you as the writer what is it that it illuminates that's interesting about now for you? Don't think too hard.
It's a big question.
Well, you all did it.
I'm very leery of being the straight passing cis man in the middle
Well, don't
who
go
starts
first.
every
No,
time.
okay, that question's for anyone but Kaveh. We don't want that for us either. But you all did do it. I think that's really interesting. You all chose to write these stories that sort of span a similar time frame, but also deal with the past and future generations. It's all very concerned with more than just now.
So you don't have to start. Although I do want to. I think for me, this connects actually to the previous question too of home. My book is so much about why we become who we become, and to me, place is inseparable from that, and also things like 9/11 events, right? The time that we're living through, and there's also, of course, our families. It's just hard to escape that, right? You can try your best to not be like your parents, and in trying your best not to be like your parent, you are defining your life that way, And so I think that there was no way that I couldn't write about that in a book that was about becoming yourself, why we are the way we are. And so I started, I guess I didn't really know the project at the beginning of my writing of it, but it very quickly became clear that there was no way to just say, okay, here's a person, here's how a person gets made, without looking into their past and sort of hanging out there.
I never felt like I don't feel as a writer like I have that much say in where my books are set or when they are, which I'm not somebody who's able to force the plot in a way that I think intellectually or creatively, or I think intellectually is the right decision. I can't move it to a place just because it's a city I've known. And so the 90s happened, I could not have imagined setting it any time outside of that. So maybe there's something at work in my mind that made that decision for me. But what I did find in writing the book at that moment was when there is this, I think it was a time when we were starting to feel globalization in a very different way. And we weren't calling it that necessarily. People in certain rooms and certain corridors were certainly using that language. But it was a time where people were crossing borders and they were accessing each other's media and music and narratives. And in the world of academia, where my character is, she spends her life, she is tapped into some of the ideas and the thinking that's coming from countries she's never been to. And so it was a moment when suddenly you had a name or you had a face to attach to a country that a generation prior to her would not have ever interacted with a scholar from Poland, or would not have made a good friendship with somebody from Kenya, possibly. And so the language that we use right now in the way to kind of describe that, the emergence of global connectedness, was something that in the story of my character's life, the singular narrative in my book, meant that for the first time she was realizing that she had these, she could form this unexpected kinship. And she became somebody who belonged in the world and could cross borders with navigating the complexities of citizenship, of immigration law and visas. She could cross borders with a certain ownership, a certain sense of who she was. And I really wanted to write a character who sat at a table and felt like she had something to say. And I'm not saying that she would not have a generation prior, but she was coming of age at a time when the citizenship or country of origin didn't mean that there couldn't be a conversation between two people. And so I also felt very strongly that when she grieves in the novel, throughout the novel, and she does it in the kind of isolation that we don't necessarily grant people in this moment. I mean, people maintain their private lives even as the world is very public, even as conversations and social media has sort of taken over our lives. But she grieved privately, and she kept her grief a secret that would not have been something she could have necessarily pulled off in this moment. And so I think some part of me felt like I wanted her life to be public and border crossing in a way that maybe in the 70s and 80s it couldn't have been, but I also wanted her private life to remain private in the way that it might not have been in this moment, which meant that she couldn't grieve her private grief, nor did she necessarily, when 9/11 happened, nor was she part of a world that was, there were conversations happening, but the world wasn't banging on and expressing these theories that she had to decide what she wanted to attach herself to. You even grieved some of these national and global crises in a more private way than you would now. So that felt very right to me, that she was public in some ways and private in some others, and that felt like a very 90s experience.
Yeah. I mean, I can't improve upon what's already been said. I think that for me, the great ethical crisis of the 21st century seems to be so far the abstraction of casualty data. I think that when you see a figure like 40,000 civilians murdered in Gaza, right? That is a pulverizingly large number, but I can't somatically distinguish between 40,000 and 40,001, or 39,999, right? Like, I understand it in my higher brain that those are like quantifiably different values, but I can't feel it right here, right? Whereas, my younger niece writes letters to my dog. You know what I mean? Like, I'm serious, she has never written, she's never written me a letter or my spouse, but she really, my dog's name is Galilee, after a sea in northern Palestine. and she writes him letters like regularly, like every couple months we get a letter full of like pitched to him, like in her voice with pictures of him, right? The way that I love her is a way that each of those children was loved. You know what I mean? It's not any different, right? And so when I imagine that, it lends a kind of particularity to casualty data. And then when I lay that particularity over 40,000, right, suddenly it returns to the abstraction of casualty data, the granularity of individual narrative. You see what I'm saying? And so when you read a book about, you know, the central event in my book is that in 1988, the U.S. Naval warship Vincennes shot down an Iranian passenger plane, Iran Air Flight 655, shot it down over the sea, the Persian Gulf, killing all 290 people on board, including 66 children, right? Now, if I had told you 291 people or 289 people, that wouldn't have like registered in your brain, you know what I mean? It's not because you're morally immature. It's not a moral failure on your part, but it does feel like a moral crisis, right? That we can't distinguish that, right? Narrative art is a way to return to the abstraction of casualty data, the somatic correlative of individual loss, the somatic pulverization of individual loss. That is the promise into which I threw myself with this novel, and I think that I could say the same thing for both of these panelists, right? Yeah.
As you're talking, I was thinking about how, you know, we were all asked to describe our novels, and the descriptions really do not do justice to the novels themselves, right? They never can. And like marketing copy, like I would love for all books to not have any marketing copy on them, because it's sort of like takes away from the book itself, and the books are reflections. I mean, they're things that human beings worked on over a lot of time, and that human beings thought so deeply about. And I think that, yeah, I mean, when you read a novel, like that's sort of a practice for, you know, recognizing that each of those lives on the plane was a life, right? Yeah. And like you can think about it in the abstract, the same way you look at a list or something and you're like, okay, these novels are this way or whatever. There's assumptions made, but I think that the reality is like everyone is so specific. There's such specificity to each person, and I think, you know, it applies too to this like multi-generational question. You know, the fact that in immigrating, I lost a lot of sort of intimacy with family members. I lost sort of contact with my grandparents, for example. I can be in the same room as them, but I just don't really speak the language in a way that I would need to in order to fully connect to them. And so I think writing is a way for me to sort of imagine myself into not exactly their situation, but sort of another human being.
This sort of leads to something else that I wanted to talk about, because in addition to this being like a multi-generational panel, I think it was pitched in the copy that I've forgotten as an immigration story, a story about immigrants. And I think, you know, as we're in this election year and there's a lot of conversation in politics about immigration, right? And it's always been in my whole lifetime, it's always been a huge topic in politics. However, I feel like in the literary space, so often immigration stories are sort of pitched as these slice of life books, and they're almost like treated as something that's apolitical. And all three of you have written these stories that deal with immigration and are pretty overtly political. I mean, Rachel, your book is really dealing, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's dealing with a serious question about the value of being a person. I can't say more. I swear I'm not trying to be weird, but I don't want to spoil it. But it's dealing with a serious question. Obviously, Kaveh, your book is dealing with first of all, the plane that you're talking about, but also like what are people willing to live and die for? And that's not a spoiler because the title's Martyr. So, and so I'm wondering how you all were thinking about balancing this political topic that we acknowledge is political in all discourse, right? Like no one would be like, immigration's apolitical, immigration and like, you know, whatever. But But when it comes to writing about it, so often I feel like that's removed, especially in the fiction. I'm not sure if you felt a dissonance or if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying I think this connects a bit to what Kaveh was talking about, that when I teach at the graduate program at University of Mississippi, and I find that with many of my students over and over, I find myself saying, if your characters don't have affection for anybody, then this is a first draft. Either you need to scrap it and rewrite it, or you need to go back to it, because we think that there's a sophistication to writing worlds in which characters are removed from their emotions. The sophisticated work is writing love and writing care on the page, and it's really, really hard to do. And so I think that touches on the politicization of fiction, in that you have to do two things. You have to bring the world into the book in a way that counts, but you also have to recognize that the reason that it matters, that families are separated at a border, that policy unfolds the way it does, that wars continue in the way they do, the reason it matters is because people love people. And people are, and we live in a world where we want that love to be protected, and we live in a world where that love is not protected. And so that felt like the task of writing a book in which the politics were going to matter, but they were only going to matter because the characters were, they wanted so much for themselves and for other people. They felt so much love, and for that to be threatened was it made the context may have been political, but the story was intimate and was domestic. And I think that that's something that I really love in the books that I love so much, and I want in my own writing to make sure that affection, that care, and just the love. I mean, there's no good synonym for it. The love is at the core of the story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When I was writing my novel, I was also concurrently working on an anthology called The Penguin Book of Spiritual Verse, which is an anthology in which I start from the earliest attributable author of our species in ancient Mesopotamia and follow the human project of spiritual writing through the Aboriginal Antipodean oral epics to indigenous Mesoamerican poetries to sub-Saharan African poetries. It really tries to be expansive in certain ways, all the way into Clifton and Ceylon. But so while I was writing the novel, I was also working on this other project, and I mentioned the earliest attributable author in human literature. Her name was Enheduanna. She was a Sumerian priestess from the Sumerian city-state of Ur, for all the Ur heads out there. Anyone here from Ur? Ur's in the house. During her time, we know that during the succession, when her father, King Sargon, died, she was exiled. And so, like Ovid, she writes a lot of her poetry from exile, right? And one of her most famous, translated, I guess that makes it one of the most famous, surviving poems is this hymn to the goddess Inanna, who, if you've read Gilgamesh, it's the same goddess. And at the end of it, she says, remember, she's writing from exile. This is from Jane Hirschfield's translation. She says, now I have been cast out to the place of lepers. Daylight is hidden all around me. Sandstorms cover my mouth. Even my sex is dust. And what I hear in that is she's writing from exile. Now I've been cast out to the place of lepers, right? She's pissed, you know what I mean? She's angry at having been exiled. Again, if the great moral crisis for our brains is the abstraction of casualty data, then the great of the 21st century, then the great moral crisis for our politics is going to be refugee crises, which we're already failing miserably and which will only be exacerbated by climate crisis. And here we have the earliest attributable author of our species, the precipitating subject of all of our species' writing being a refugee saying, this sucks. You know what I mean? Just protesting to God, petitioning the empty sky, saying, this fucking sucks. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that we've really improved much on that. You know, I don't know that we've really gotten a whole lot better. I don't remember what the original question was.
Me neither.
I think it was about fiction as political, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So immigration. Yeah. Well,
He's back.
well, no. I mean, so there's no isolated. Sorry, I'll shut up. But like, there's no like isolated zone of inquiry. You know what I mean? Like right now, I am having a nice time talking to my friends whose books I like, and Traci, who I like just generally, and afterwards I'm probably going to talk to more people that I like, and maybe I'll get to meet some of you, and that'll be dope. And I'm aware of all of this, and it's like a pleasant experience, while I'm concurrently aware that there are multivalent genocides happening right now on the planet Earth, while I'm also aware that I'll need to pee at some point in the next half hour, while I'm also, you know what I mean? Like, all of these awarenesses are happening concurrently, right? They arrive on the same neural charge. It is just that language can't accommodate that. Grammatical language can only put things in sequence, right? So I can only say this, then this, then this, then this, right? But I wanted to come as close as possible to that at-onceness that cognition actually feels like. You know what I mean? Because in this moment, I'm feeling all of those things. I'm not like ignorant of the fact that there are multiple genocides happening right now while I'm sitting up here with you guys, and yet I'm here having a nice time. You know, that's not because I'm like deficient ethically, I don't think. It's just because I have a mature brain, you know what I mean? And I wanted a book that felt like that. You know, the joy that I have known in this life has been made wise by having known profound grief, and the grief that I have known in this life has been made complex by having known profound joy. And I don't think that one needs to sort of ethically infantilize their work to try to pretend otherwise.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that sort of too muchness, Kaveh, that you're talking about, I think the novel is just one of the best mediums that we have for really getting at that, you know, or at least like trying. Maybe not always succeeding, but trying. And I think, yeah, for me, I sort of had no choice but to make the book political. I mean, I think all writing is political, probably. I mean, okay, never mind. I'm going to walk that back. But I think, you know, I started this book in December of 2016, which, if you can remember, was a pretty weird time. And I did not think that I would be here today still thinking about Donald Trump.
Did you start it in December 2016 because of November 2016, or did you just coincide? Like, were you writing towards that moment?
Well, so that question is so interesting because it's like, of course, you can't like,
Right.
it's not possible to separate like who I am as a person, feeling all these things that Kaveh's talking about, right? Like doing fine in my own life, but also like deeply saddened by this thing that had just happened, and the book was very much about that. It was about these American narratives, especially surrounding immigration, which, you know, America is a country of immigrants, and it's a country of stories, right? It's a country of narratives, and I really wanted to interrogate those narratives, you know, these narratives of like exceptionalism, individualism, the narrative of America at all, right? The narrative that to belong means to be a white person is so not true when you think about where America started, right? Like it belonged to the native people, and America was just a story that America wanted to tell about itself, right? And so I think that any story of immigration, yeah, is a story of that history, right? And I have been, I mean, this is sort of a tangent from there, but I've been thinking recently a lot about how I think writing is inherently, well, okay, not all writing, but I think that some writing, or this is the way, maybe the way that I'm writing, I guess, I'll just speak for myself, is that, you know, a book exists within capitalism, right? It's like a product that we buy and people are selling out there right now, but it's really not about that, right? It's about this exchange between two people, and it's about the labor that goes into it. And I've been thinking about how writing is just, again, just for me, is like so, it's almost like this like fuck you to capitalism, because I do it so slowly. And, you know, I'll write, a page one day, and then the next day just delete the whole thing. And that's actually, I was thinking the other day when I was like trying to speed myself up, trying to like force inspiration, I was thinking, no, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, is taking my time and not, accepting, I don't know, just this demand from market forces that I be constantly productive. Writing is something else. It's something that sort of exists outside of that, even if we're sort of forced into it. I think it's about the sort of exchange that we have with ourselves and ultimately with other people. And I feel so lucky to get to do that.
The reason I asked if when you wrote the book in December 2016 is like if it came from that moment, and this might be like a really basic question, and I literally don't think I've ever asked an author this, and I've been doing this now for 6+ years, so here goes. This is maybe embarrassing for me. Does a book just come to you in a moment and you're like, oh shit? Where does the action, I know people will be like, oh, I've been thinking a lot about dolphins and global warming, and then they'll be like, and the book started from this idea around that. But at what point does the actual idea of dolphins and global warming become at the table, right? Like, were you already thinking of the book in October 2016, and then in December you're like, okay, it's time? Or did it literally come to you in December and you were like, oh shit, it's happening, like it's writing time, I'm on my typewriter here.
Yeah, I want to hear how everybody else does it, because I think it's different for everybody, honestly. For me, the dolphins and global warming.
You can have that novel idea also. You could, any of you can have it. Jamie, I see you back there. You can have the idea. All of you.
But that feels like a thing that you can just, sort of give to ChatGPT. Like here, we can all write that novel tonight. In fact, write
Please,
it
and then submit it, and we'll have a competition.
But I think for me personally, it's really just not that efficient,
okay.
Right? It's like very inefficient. Like I was saying earlier, it's really about just like one sentence leading to the next one. And I definitely did not have the full idea when I started writing. And, research is as much a part of my process as, the actual writing itself, right? It's sort of inseparable from that. And so I think I'm always like, it's I don't know, it's my life that I'm living, but it's also what I'm reading. It's the conversations that I'm having with authors in the past. It's so many things, and I've been thinking about it as this it's funny you talk about dolphins and global warming. I was thinking about actually you think about snowballing, right? Like a sort of novel is like snowballing ideas. My snowball is disgusting. It's filled with cat hair and I don't know, just chewing gum. It's just this, not a pristine, beautiful snowball. It's this thing that just sort of accumulates stuff. And I do a lot of the work, I think, in revision. But curious about you guys, yeah.
There's something that happens. I write everything by hand, and so several drafts of this novel like this before it ever goes in the computer, because the computer makes everything look so. We talked about this. It makes it look so done. Yeah, Garamond. It's you could write the phone book in Garamond and it would sound profound. You know what I mean? It's just. And whereas it actually has to slap for me to be impressed by it on the page.
And I told you should write it in Comic Sans, and then you'll know if it's any good.
But even just the kinetic momentum of doing this, you know what I mean? It's it keeps you going. I don't mean to speak in the second person. The kinetic momentum of this keeps me going. Whereas if I'm on the computer, I'm like, oh, I misspelled that. Let me go back. You know what I mean? It's a lot of this thing instead of just continuously doing this, right? But I say this to say, there is something that happens in the synapse between me and the page where something that is not my intelligence enters. And I know you're all it sounds super woo, but it is literally true. If I was as smart as my writing, I would dictate my writing. You know what I mean? I would just record it in a voice note and then hand it to my agent. You know what I mean? There is something that happens.
Next book.
Yeah. You can call it the muse, you can call it God, you can call it the unconscious, you could call it whatever. I'm not that interested in naming the thing, but there is something that happens that makes what happens here smarter than this, right? And so like the earliest drafts of I can't remember if we spoke about this, but the earliest drafts of my novel, or the earliest pages, not full drafts of the novel, but were just like this weekends at Maury's, Weekend with Maury thing.
Tuesdays with Maury?
Tuesdays with Maury, yeah. Where
was
it's
a
like
weekday thing,
yeah, where it's
actually.
like it was just the artist and everything was like there was no Cyrus, and it was like just random people sitting across from her having conversations, and it was just a portrait of the artist. Cyrus came in because I was writing and I realized that the person sitting across from her had to be as interesting as she was for it to work narratively, right? And now Cyrus, I think most people would say he's the protagonist of the book, but he was not any part of my initial conception of the book, right? And so I say this to say, like, that happened doing this, you know what I mean? The post-war Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert, Zbigniew, after whom a character in my novel is named. His first name sounds like a sneeze, Zbigniew. Zbigniew. He was related to George Herbert too, for those like metaphysical poetry heads out there. But he, hey, oh, that was you? I thought. Well, you were laughing. I thought you were like really hyped. I was like, yeah, no, I love like Dunn and Herbert and all those guys. But I was a poet before. I still feel like a poet who's like sort of wearing prose drag. But what am I talking about? Oh, Zbigniew Herbert said that there are two kinds of writer. There are ox writers and there are cat writers. And the ox writer is the sort of writer who's out in the field every day, dutifully pulling the plow, you know, no matter how hard the soil, no matter how whatever. And the cat writer is the sort of writer who, like, you know, patrols the house and stares importantly out the window and takes elaborate naps. And then, like, when a mote of dust catches a sunbeam, they pounce at it, right? And that's sort of like inspiration, right? And he's like, these are the two kinds of writers. And I remember I asked my spouse, transcendent American poet Paige Lewis, transcendent American novelist now, Paige Lewis, which kind they were. And they were like, I'm a porcupine from a medieval bestiary. I promise I'm going to land this plane. And I was like, unpack that for me, darling. And they said that in medieval bestiaries, it said that the mother porcupine would go into like the berry bush and sort of roll around, so all the berries stuck to her quills, and then she would go back to her children and like feed the children's off the berries that were stuck to her quills, right? And I feel like that's exactly what you just described. Like, I just do all this research and I roll around and my snowball's really messy. You know what I mean?
It's also dangerous for the children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's like spiders and the webs. Like, they know which, you know, like they know which ones to step on and which ones not to step on. I don't know. I don't know how porcupines
What are you
work.
though?
Oh, I'm naturally left in a contextless vacuum. I'm very much an ox. But I'm sort of living a cat life right now and trying not to resent either the life or my cattishness within it.
Okay. So both.
Well, I'm truly an ox. Like, I'm constitutionally, pathologically, I'm an ox. But because I teach and, you know, the world sort of has conspired against my oxenness. Oxenishness?
Yeah, oxenness, sure. Sheila, are you an oxen
yeah, I'm
or
sorry,
a cat?
I'm sorry.
No. I don't know.
Or cat.
I don't know. I think maybe both. But I was thinking when you mentioned 2016 that I don't have a creative memory of November 2016. Like, I remember it as a human and as a mother and as a person trying to be moving socially through the world and trying to sort through, obviously, a political landscape. I think like a lot of us were, apparently this is the country we've inhabited, but we didn't know it. What does that reveal about us? What does that reveal about community, about so many facets of life? But I don't have a memory of that moment as an artist. And I think the reason might be, whatever animal camp this puts me in, all of them maybe, I just felt as though as a writer, I had been sad about a lot of things for a long time. And there wasn't one moment that was going to make me feel that sadness more acutely. I felt it as a person. I felt like, what am I doing in the world? But the part of me that retreated into my story has always been untouched by what's happening immediately in the world around me. And even as I say it, I feel a disconnect between what I'm trying to say and the words, which is that I very much situate my characters in the world. And part of what meant so much to me in starting my book, and that I really tried to see the way, because when what you start out with is very different from what it turns into because of the magic of the creative process. And part of being a good writer is letting that happen, letting go of what you believe the book was going to be about sometimes, letting your characters breathe a little bit. They may move in a direction you hadn't anticipated. As they become good characters, as your book becomes good, you don't control them entirely anymore. And there's beauty to that. But I felt very much like I had to put that away in order to write. And I was thinking, however, in the book, I was thinking a lot about the politics of the 90s and the way it felt to come of age in the 90s, the way racism felt, the way misogyny felt, the way that you weren't talking publicly about so many challenges in the world that felt incredibly personal. But I always thought that, like, from the time I was a kid, I have been remembering and noticing the small nicks that other people experienced around me, that I can tell you the composition, the social dynamics of rooms that I was in as a small child. And those really affected me. And I think that I was surrounded by non-writers who, if I said, do you not remember that kid? He was an asshole. They would have no recollection. But I remember the way he made another kid feel, and I'm still upset about it. And so, like, and that's not a great way to go through the world. It's not, but it means that when something awful happens, it is, you are responding to it as a person who's always been really affected. And I think that one of the qualities that makes it hard to move through the world, that makes the world really lonely, I think for a writer, sometimes you can be in a room full of people and they're good people. You can feel really lonely because the way that they might be processing the world, the specificity of your morals and what matters to you are just out of sync with theirs. Or the nature of that conversation doesn't lend itself to the kind of conversation you want to have, and it's a really lonely feeling. And so even though I'm a pretty social, outspoken person, and I write characters who move through the world in a pretty extroverted fashion, I'm really tuned into that loneliness that we carry when we are affected by things easily, and we remember the small injustices, even if we we didn't endure them on our own, even if it was the person next to us that did, and that it's a part of you that really can't get over the political discourse from 20, 30 years ago that you found wrenching. And you can't get over the things that happened on like a global scale that you found wrenching 30 years ago. So again, I've moved away from the question, but I guess that all of these things that I feel as a writer, part of the writing process for me, and a significant part of it, is how do I map all of these abstract feelings and ideas onto the very intimate world of this one person who matters in my book, who's my protagonist. And that is, I don't know how that happens. I mean, you have to, because you have to write another book, and you have to know how that happens again, and I don't know, but it happens, and
It'll happen again.
And it happens again. Something that I told my undergrads recently, and I think some of them were like, but I felt it very strongly that writing is, there's a song that's playing real low, and you can hear it, and nobody else can. And so much of this is just listening to that song play, like trying to catch it, sometimes you're gonna miss a beat, but you're trying to catch it, because there's this like very, very soft, simmering conversation about the world and how we're affected by it, and the things that make us, that bring us relief and bring us grief, and it's not out there blaring, it's real, it's playing real low. And so I guess as I start my next book, I'm trying to listen for that song again. And some days I think I hear it, and some days I don't, and I toss the pages.
We're going to open it up to audience questions. If anybody has one, raise your hand. Yes, in the hat, please.
Hi. Wow, I spent the past 45 minutes trying to figure out how to word this question, so I'm super nervous. I guess as a journalist, I'm really interested in nonfiction, and
Same.
all that talked about this. As a daughter of immigrants, I recognize that your books all borrow from your own culture, cultures, or lives of people that you know at least. So I guess, what does the freedom of fiction do for you? Why fiction? Why not autobiography? Like, what would that allow you to explore that you couldn't have otherwise?
Great
I
job.
can't believe you were nervous to ask
That was so good.
Also, you're great at projecting. You're great at projecting. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done.
You did great. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, so I have written nonfiction because when I was growing up, my parents, whenever I said I wanted to be a writer, they would say, "Oh, you want to be a journalist," because that's more of a real job. So I've always written nonfiction alongside the fiction. I mean, I think fiction is just, it like is done so much in the dark. I think of nonfiction as more of a puzzle that I can put together, and it's really satisfying to put that puzzle together. And fiction is like, maybe it's a puzzle, but you're totally in the dark, and you're like digging the pieces out of the trash or something. I don't know, it's like a totally different process, and I think I like that process of not knowing, because I think that's the reality of life, is that I don't know, and I just pretend that I know things and want to like pretend that I control things. And the reality is that I just don't. And I think in fiction I get to contend with that and really believe that and exist in that discomfort, knowing that it's also at the end of the day just words, right? And it's not that big of a deal, and it's going to be okay. And I think, something Sheila, you said reminded me that the writing is so much for me, I think, just about noticing. And for better and worse, I notice what I notice, and we all notice what we notice, and that's what makes us who we are, right? A friend of mine was telling me that she loved certain details in my book, and the ones that she picked out, I could say immediately, were because I am just like a shame-based person, and I'm so, there's like a lot of details that I have in the book that are just because like a lot of moments that I remember from my childhood are like, moments where I felt ashamed, and I think that, I don't know, in fiction I get to do that, right? Like I get to notice things and sort of suck them into this work that is so mysterious to me. Kaveh mentioned the muse, right? Or some kind of like godlike inspiration, whatever you want to call it. Like I definitely feel that, but I also think there's this beautiful wisdom in ourselves, right? And like the past versions of me and the future versions of me that all get to hang out together in this one text. So yeah, I don't know. Fiction, again, it's for me, it's where I get to do that over a long time. With nonfiction, you have some deadlines, right? And there's some pressure. But I think with fiction, I guess it's just like, I've told my editor, actually, my next book is going to take 5 to 7 years.
Great.
And that's just what it's going to take, maybe even longer. And that's just the way it is.
Okay. We'll do another question. Yes?
What role, if any, does ritual play in your life? I know you mentioned things like handcuffs, and you guys have specifics that you go to.
And if it involves snacks, you should include that just while we're here.
I don't know. My rituals evolve so much, so I'm going to send this to Kaveh or Rachel.
I already spoke on mine. I mean, I'm not super precious. I've tried to disabuse myself of that over the years as a reformed ox. I do like a Muji 0.7 because they're cheap, but they feel not cheap. Like they feel clean the way, you know how like, I mean, I know like fuck Apple and everything, but you know how Apple products just kind of feel clean and sweet, you know what I mean? Like this feels like that to me. I mean, fuck Apple truly in every direction, but also like fuck everyone, like fuck everything.
Yeah.
I mean, but you know what I mean? Like it's like this is gonna end up in a landfill and then in a turtle's throat, you know? But it's like, but you know what I mean? Like, but also like, yeah.
I think you could replace the middle, by the way.
I know they have them, but I also buy way more. Yeah, it's fine.
I have so many rituals. We can talk afterward.
I will say one thing about rituals that is a non-answer to the question, that I have at various points thought, this is my ritual. I will tell everybody about it. This is the way I do it. And then it goes. But for a long time, my ritual was, because I have young-ish kids, and so at the course of writing the book, the book gets older, they get older. So there were long stretches when I was writing and thinking constantly about their needs. So I would sit down and think, like, oh, what did they have for dinner? We haven't had a vegetable this week. I should probably go get broccoli. But then, like, I don't get broccoli because I gotta go right. And so that ticker is constant. And so my ritual for a long time was don't think about the kids, put all of that away, And then I ended up writing a novel where the daily demands of motherhood and parenthood are at its center. So maybe it didn't work, and maybe that was fine.
Yeah.
Because I obviously, you can't sometimes. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do like, I mean, I'm not talking about myself now, but I do like when you can see that sort of like lived relationship, right? Like, when asked why her poems were so short, Lucille Clifton said, because that's how long it takes my kids to nap, you know? Or the poet Oliver Baez Bendorf, who's a wonderful poet, he's spoken about this publicly, I'm not betraying confidences, but his first book, the lines were very, very short. And then in his second book, the lines were quite a bit longer, and I heard someone ask him about that, and he said, well, he got top surgery between the two, so he got to stop binding, and so like he had more breath that he could draw, right? Yeah, so he could like draw in more breath so he could use longer lines, right? And so like, or like Bernadette Meyer wrote an epic poem using all the epic conventions called Midwinter's Day about like one mother taking her kids to the library one day and like all the wacky shit that, you know what I mean? But it's like, it like elevates that to the sort of like macho dick swinging epic tradition, you know what I mean? And so like, I'm sorry, but I say this to say like, I like when you can see things like a person's lived experience actually showing up in the work and not just the person trying, you know, like we're all trying to articulate our unprecedented experiences, and when you can find an unprecedented language or an unprecedented form to fit that in, I think that's really, really special.
I think we're out of time, but before we go, I'm just going to do two quick things, which is one, thank you all for coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And also thank you to every single volunteer and organizer of this festival. Our amazing room dad, Preston, for holding it down. If you see someone wearing a volunteer anything badge, please thank them on your way out. But the last thing, and I'm going to take the last question, which is we're in a room full of readers. We're at a book festival. There's a giant tent full of books. What is one book that is from someone who is here this weekend that you're really excited about, and they cannot be one of the people on this panel? You're getting a personalized book recommendation from these three geniuses.
Yo, Sibo, hold your book up real quick.
Yes. They sold it out?
Oh, what a flex, though.
Okay, we'll go to Lemuria and order a copy of Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. It's his debut book. It came out on Tuesday. Yeah,
Sky Full of Elephants.
It's about a world in which all the white people walk into the nearest body of water and are dead. Okay, what else?
I'm gonna recommend a book called Mother Doll by Katya Apakina. It's very much a multi-generational novel. I mean, think about like nesting Russian dolls, right? It's about a woman who finds herself sort of reluctantly pregnant. I don't know if reluctantly is the right word, but she's very funny, very weird, and she talks to a ghost.
Okay.
Love that.
Yeah. Love a ghost.
I'm gonna get I don't know anything about golf. Mulligan? Is that when you get a swing at it again?
Yeah, a redo.
All right, a redo? Yeah, I'm gonna get it. I don't know why I went to that, like with absolutely zero confidence. So buy Sibo's book, but also, I mean, I don't know if y'all have heard about Nana's book, a little known indie called Chain Gang All Stars. No one really talked about it, so I don't know if you guys have heard of it. But no, I actually was going to say you should walk down the little authors corridor where all the people have their self-published books, because that's stuff that you'll never, I mean, realistically, you're probably not going to have a lot of other opportunities to buy a lot of those books. And like whatever you walk away with will indelibly inflect your thinking about, you know, maybe it won't be your favorite book of all time, maybe it will be, but like it will indelibly inflect the algorithms of your thinking in some way. And this is a unique opportunity to do that. Whereas, I mean, buy all the books from the bookseller too, but like you'll be able to buy those books elsewhere. But like that little walk is like a really special, cool thing.
I'm going to plug two of my wonderful colleagues at the University of Mississippi. One is Sharad Avent. I don't buy nearly enough poetry, and I don't read nearly enough poetry, and it pushes me every time I do. So his collection, Muscadine, is beautiful. And Beth Ann Fennelly's Heating and Cooling. If you need to keep a book next to your bed and just read one of those every night.
Say the
it
title
is
again.
Heating and Cooling.
Heating and Cooling.
It's sold out. So,
Gosh.
so yes, it is a lovely book to keep next to you. So.
Okay. They're going to be signing down at the tent after this, so please come sign. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
When I met you,
Thank you,
I bought
Traci.